Great, excellent. All right, thank you everyone for joining us at this combined Society for Causal Inference and OCIS joint webinar. I'm excited to get started. We have a really interesting and timely topic on funding beyond the NIH, and we have a couple of great panelists who certainly have expertise in that area and have offered to share some of their time with us. So I think folks are mostly getting logged in. It looks like we have 44 attendees and 6 panelists. We can go ahead and get started. I'll just briefly say, my name's Andrew Adman. I'm an assistant professor of internal medicine and epidemiology at the University of Michigan. I'm a member of the Society for Causal Inference Professional Development Committee, physician by training. I'm very excited to introduce our panelists. I'll start with Dr. Michael Thompson. Dr. Thompson is the Director of Analytic Strategy for the Center for Healthcare Outcomes and Policy and an Associate Professor of Cardiac Surgery here at the University of Michigan, where he also has joint appointments in the Departments of Health Management and Policy and Epidemiology at our University of Michigan School of Public Health. He received his MPH from the University of Michigan before getting his PhD in epidemiology from Michigan State University in 2015. At Michigan, Dr. Thompson serves as co-director of the Michigan Cardiac Rehab Network and a senior advisor of the Michigan Value Collaborative. He and his collaborators lead both federally funded research and quality improvement initiatives supported by a variety of funders that he'll talk about today, all aimed at enhancing cardiovascular healthcare quality, outcomes, and policy. So that's Dr. Thompson. We also have Dr. Shu Yang, who's professor of statistics at North Carolina State University. Dr. Yang earned her PhD in applied mathematics and statistics from Iowa State, and then completed postdoctoral training at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, where her main research focus was and is on causal inference and data integration, especially within the field of comparative effectiveness research in healthcare and health studies. She also extensively works on methods development around missing data and spatial statistics. And Dr. Yang serves as the principal investigator for multiple projects funded through NCSU seed grants, industry sponsorships, the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, and the FDA. So we're really excited to have both of these great panelists join us today. Before we launch into questions, I'd love to ask other members of the Society for Causal Inference or OCIS to just briefly introduce themselves as well. So maybe we'll start with Dr. Keel.
Hi, I'm Luke Keel. I'm a professor, now a full professor of statistics and surgery at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm one of the co-chairs of the outreach committee here at SCI.
Thank you. Dr. Nabi?
Hi, I'm Razia Nabi. I'm Rollins Assistant Professor in the Department of Biostatistics at Emory University. I'm also co-chairing the Professional Development Committee.
Great, thank you. Dr. Wang?
Hi, I'm an assistant professor at Dartmouth, the Dartmouth Institute, and by training, I'm a biostatistician. I'm a member of our Professional Development Committee.
Great, perfect. And Dominic, I know you said your internet connection's unstable, but if you have enough juice to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
I'll try, yeah. So yeah, hi, I'm Dominic. I'm an assistant professor at Stanford in the stats department. And yeah, I'm one of the organizers of the online causal inference seminar. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So just to get this conversation started, I would love for our panelists, both Dr. Thompson and Yang, to maybe just take a brief moment to talk about their current and prior funding sources, especially funding sources beyond the NIH in line with the topic of this webinar, and just some brief details, maybe a brief description of the funder, the funding mechanism, and how it fits with your specific applied and methodologic interests.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Appreciate the invitation and happy to talk about some of the experience that I've had. While I think primarily my funding has come from federal funds, such as the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. For the past 6 or 7 years, I've had some support from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, They help support statewide quality improvement collaboratives across a number of kind of clinical domains, and I'm sure I'm happy to talk in more detail about some of this, but they've helped to provide some salary support and seed funding for projects that has really helped to kind of launch a lot of the work that we do here in Michigan.
Great, thank you, Dr. Yang.
Yeah, so as you introduced before, I actually served as a PI for small-scale seed fundings from NC State and also some external research grants from the industry, NSF, NIH, and also FDA U1 grant. So I'm gonna focus on the FDA U1 because the title of the session is about beyond the fundings from NIH. And we know that the NIH funding mechanism usually is PI-driven, independent research, less structured oversight from the NIH program. But FDA U1 grant, which is kind of different because this is a research project cooperative agreement. So this is not fully independent like our one grant. And NIH, in our case, it's the FDA staff actually plays a very important role in project direction, milestones, and execution. For example, the project meetings, data sharing, and also regulatory oversight. So I have been one of the co-PIs on this grant. And this is a very collaborative grant, I would say, because this is the multi-institutional grant, and we have different PIs from academia and also industry. So this is a very different grant I have been involved in.
Great. Thank you. All sort of a lot of questions to ask about each of your funding sources. I think maybe sticking with the topic of the FDA grant that you're on, Dr. Yang, can you say a little bit more about what that collaborative or cooperative agreement looks like in practice? You know, to what extent is FDA staff involved in the day-to-day grant operations? You know, what types of things do you communicate about and work on collaboratively? How is the experience maybe different from a project like a typical R1 where it's more investigator driven and independent?
Yeah, I think this grant emphasizes the collaboration and also interdisciplinary research. This is because the FDA's priority actually nowadays is how to develop innovative methods for utilizing real-world evidence studies. We know that prior to a few years ago, like 2016, randomized clinical trial has been the gold standard for treatment effect evaluation, and the FDA requires sponsors to conduct randomized clinical trials in order for their drug and device approval. But nowadays, because the 21st Century Cures Act, it emphasizes real data to speed up the drug development. And therefore, there are requests for innovative methods and also rigorous methods development, how to utilize real-world evidence and real-world data for drug and device approval. So this really encourage collaborations between pharmaceutical companies, FDA, and also academia. So that we can identify methods that meet the FDA's standards for treatment effect evaluation. And we have the monthly meeting with the FDA team. So we need to report what kind of the progress we have, and also what are our questions to the FDA colleagues, and also some concerns from industry or FDA or our side. Yeah, so this is a very active discussion involved in the whole project. This is very different from the typical R1, right? So once you have the R1, you can go ahead and conduct your research. So there's an annual report, but there's no very active discussion back and forth between the agency and our investigators.
That's really interesting. I should sort of say, if anyone in the audience or any panelists have questions, either relative to this particular funding mechanism or anything else that's on your mind about this topic, please put them in the Q&A in the chat, and we'll share them with our panelists. So one question that I had, it seems like this funding mechanism or opportunity is really closely aligned with the work that you're passionate about and excited about that I think would resonate with a lot of people on this call. How did you find it? And maybe for Dr. Thompson as well, sort of how do you identify funders or funding mechanisms that support some of the methodologic or methods forward work that you're interested in?
Yeah, this is a great question. I actually learned about this funding opportunity through a collaborator at the pharmaceutical company because I have an ongoing partnership with several pharma companies and work closely with them on real-world evidence projects, so which are of strong interest nowadays, like in both the pharmaceutical research and the regulatory science. Because the real-world data becomes like increasingly important, right, in drug and device evaluation. However, there are still like methodology challenges and require collaboration. So because of this topic also aligned closely with the interest in regulatory science, my collaborator shared this funding announcement when it circulated internally. So this is how I learned about this opportunity. But I have other routine check. For example, I regularly monitor funding announcement distributed by NC State. So for example, Marie Davidian in our department, actually, she will share like new opportunities once she knows, which I will review to identify those relevant to my research. I also stay very proactive by discussing with collaborators. Another very quick check is you can explore whether like researchers working on related area have been funded for similar projects, right? So which often helps uncover additional like potential sponsors or the programs.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Thompson, you look like you were going to say something too on that.
Yeah, I think the mechanism that funds a lot of our work in the state through the quality improvement work. Regarding your question around like how do we build in methodology within some of this, while the funding mechanism is unique, it's probably more similar to what we see in a lot of foundation type grants, which frankly the methods and whatnot are not first and foremost in much of their mind. And I think that's a very it becomes trying to find the win-win between the stuff that you want to do and the stuff that they're interested in. And so coming up with really good overlap in what the goal is and what the potential impact is, while providing some level of detail and methodology. Frankly, the methodology is not as interesting to payers, and it's not as interesting to foundations where they're more interested in the impact and the goal of the work that you're doing. And so I think it's it's really important to know your audience and focus on the things, while in, traditional NIH funding, we are often focusing a lot on the strategy and the approach and the methodologic rigor. Those things are important, but they are maybe secondary to what the goal is in terms of, working with non-traditional funders like payers and foundations.
Thank you. It's really interesting. Can you say a bit more about that, or maybe Dr. Yang too? How do you adapt your scientific story, either the sort of topic that you're focusing on, or how do you talk about the methods to get sort of interest and buy-in from some of these payers?
Yeah, I think, it's really important to be a good listener. They will tell you what they're interested in. They will tell you what they want to fund, which is, is not unique to payers. The NIH does the same thing. They will kind of give you a sense of the things, the priorities of things that they want to fund. And so, being a good listener and having conversations around, what are their priorities, and hearing from them what the focus of, if they have funds available, those funds are usually earmarked for some sort of strategic direction. So finding out what they're really interested in supporting, and then positioning yourself uniquely well to fill that gap. And I think those are, so it's really important to be a good listener and hearing what people are saying in terms of their funding, because by and large, you'll be able to find overlap between your work and what you're interested and what they want to support. So it's really important to be a good listener and figure out what specifically they want to fund, and then being responsive to that.
Yeah, I think that being a good listener is very important. And for me, I was very lucky because the funding call actually have a very matched research in the funding call, and actually it's very closely aligned. So my research has been focusing on causal inference and data integration, developing methods to generalize RCT findings to broader patient population, and also incorporate real-world data to better estimate the heterogeneity of treatment effect. Previously, I had an NIH grant that supports this line of research for 5 years. So when I see there's a funding announcement on externally controlled trials, I feel it's a natural fit rather than a major pivot. So I think this is like the funding call, like calling for me to apply for an application. And this mechanism actually is a U01 grant, as I described before, so which encourages multi-institutional collaboration. And this structure also works for me because I already collaborate closely with academia and also industry partners. And it aligns with the FDA growing emphasis on using real data and real evidence to support their regulatory decision. So I think it matches with my background very well. So why not submit an application? So I was quite lucky there.
I suspect it was probably more than luck, but thank you for sharing that. Each of you mentioned this concept of alignment, about alignment with the interests and goals of the particular funder. Can you say a bit more about how important is it to sort of find alignment versus being sort of flexible and thinking about current topics and what sort of needs to be done that you can lend your expertise to? How did you sort of find that balance? Is it ever sort of not worth doing something because you'll have to be too flexible, or is that just sort of a reality of doing the type of work we're all interested in?
Yeah, I think it's really important to if you're having conversations with a potential funder about things they're interested in funding, there is a very important discussion to have up front, which is like, is this worth my time just as much as it's worth their time? And so I think there's having those kind of back and forth and proposing ideas and getting a sense of like, am I hitting the right mark, or is this not my expertise? Because there's certainly those cases. I mean, I think the challenge with foundation funding or payer funding or other sources is that they tend to come more, at least in the sense of our Blue Cross funding, it's more contractual than it is grant. And so you have to propose very specific statements of work, and you can't really deviate from that too much. And so you have to be very careful on the front end about what you're proposing and what you're committing to, and whether or not that aligns with your work as much as it aligns with their interests. And so understanding the mechanism a little bit is also really important. Is it a grant? Is it a contract? Is it some sort of statement of work? It's and I know there are other funders like PCORI that tend to be a little more hands-on than groups like NIH. So I think those are important things to know up front before you kind of dive into it, because it can be the oversight for some of those mechanisms can be a little bit more daunting than a traditional kind of NIH grant.
Yeah, I'd say it's worth submitting an application when this new opportunity extends what you already established in a meaningful way, or it helps you reach a broader impact without like compromising your core expertise. So if the alignment feels forced or too far away from your expertise, then I think it's better to wait for a better match call, right? Of course, there are different opinions. For example, high risk, high reward proposals often require stepping into like new territory. So in which case, thoughtful planning may be advantageous. But I would suggest to ask the program officer and communicate with them earlier on and more frequently about your proposed ideas.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's sort of an interesting point, and maybe brings up the broader concept of relationship management with potential funders or with people who might be interested in supporting our work. Can you say a bit more about that and sort of what that looks like? Do you reach out to them with specific projects that you think they might be interested in to sort of pitch to them, or to sort of check in and hear about funding opportunities? Is that something that might be that you think might be useful to sort of establish those regular lines of communication, or do you kind of wait to hear about opportunities as they arise?
Oh yeah. So for me, we actually have like ongoing monthly conversations with FDA colleagues. So we have like we keep the conversation very open, and we indeed ask like whether there are like future funding mechanism, because right now we are at the third year, so this is like the end of the year for the grant. So we ask them whether there are future U01 grant like this, and we learned that this FDA funding currently is very tightening, so the future U01 mechanism are unlikely, unfortunately. So I think keep the conversation open is quite helpful for us.
Yeah, for us, I think because our Blue Cross funding comes in kind of 2-year cycles, we have to make very specific statements of work over 2 years. I think the one thing, and if you're in an opportunity where you do have opportunities to kind of extend kind of contractual type funding situations, it can be helpful to build in potential new areas for exploration so that you're not just only funding things that you're proposing things that you want to do, but you leave a little room for, we think this might be an opportunity to expand our work or to open up a new line that may be helpful for Blue Cross. And so we will often designate some proportion of our funding towards exploring new things. And those are things that we were able to do through our kind of continued conversations with Blue Cross. We have monthly meetings with them where we kind of update them on our progress, and we have discussions. Hey, we recently had a webinar, and this is what we heard from some of our members. We think this might be a really nice opportunity for continued work. So we are able to kind of modify some of those and use kind of some discretionary funding built in to explore things, at which point we would be able to, in the next statement of work, really propose new opportunities.
Great, thank you. And we have a question in the Q&A section. This question in particular is for Dr. Thompson. It says, Mike, can you say a bit more about PCORI's more hands-on approach? And I think sort of maybe in general about sort of what the hands-on approaches look like, whether it's PCORI or FDA.
Yeah, my experience with PCORI is largely through kind of close colleagues that have had PCORI funding and their discussions around their differences from traditional NIH. I think their experience has often been, while with NIH grants you have to submit annual progress reports. Within PCORI, my understanding is you also have to set very specific kind of deadlines or benchmarks, and if you don't meet those benchmarks, you may have continued conversations with your PCORI program officer. So. It's not to say that it's a contract per se, but my understanding is that it's a little bit more hands-on in terms of the relationship between the program officer and PCORI and the PI, and that they have kind of more frequent updates around how progress is being made on those certain grants.
Yeah, I think it applied the same to the FDA U01 grant. So we need to keep the milestone very open, and we need to keep track of everything.
Maybe a related question to that is, how does that affect the tempo of the science? I mean, does it change the types of projects that you might consider or pursue, knowing that you have to sort of show regular, rapid, routine progress, or is that not really part of the equation as long as you can define clear milestones?
Yeah, I think my experience has been because much of the work has to be proposed beforehand. You really have to do a lot more upfront work in thinking through what those timelines are going to look like. I think often in grants we think of like, the maybe overpromise and underdeliver, because we can propose all these things and, whether or not those things go the way we think they will only gets kind of told over time. But if that is not a kind of acceptable answer for many groups, that whether it's payers or whatnot, because they're footing the bill for very explicit work that you're doing. So we often try to do the under promise and over deliver, and that we are more conservative in our, like, we think we will get to this point here, and then if we're able to exceed that, then we're able to kind of kind of go across or maybe be a little bit more thinking through some new opportunities beyond what we've proposed, which I think is a little bit different from what we experience in traditional grant funding.
Sure.
Yeah,
We
in our sorry, yeah,
I don't know.
in our I would say like for the FDA the monthly meeting we are very it is actually very helpful because we're gonna present our research findings to them and they will provide a very timely feedback so that we can like direct our research to a more useful way. So if we are like deviate from what they are intended. So that would be very helpful. I get that timely feedback from them.
Thank you. A question from an attendee. Aside from Blue Cross Blue Shield, have you either of you had funding experience with payers or insurance companies? Maybe to build on that question, can you say a little bit more about the nuances of payer-sponsored research and maybe the type of work you might do or the types of questions they might be interested in that process?
I've only had one other experience working with a group in Tennessee that was partly funded by a payer. Payers are unique in that if you've met one payer, you've met one payer. They are totally unique. The situations in which they exist are very unique. For example, here in Michigan, Blue Cross is by far the predominant private insurance payer in the state of Michigan. I think they have 70 or 80% of the privately insured market here in Michigan. So that is to say, when it comes to funding opportunities, they are a little bit more willing to engage in some of that because they know that funding that will benefit a large portion of their kind of insured population. I think oftentimes in other experiences, engaging with payers maybe can happen when you have very explicit small pilot programs that you're trying to see whether or not some new delivery model may be effective in terms of lowering costs and improving quality for their insured population. And so if there are, if those are opportunities you're interested in pursuing, understanding their business, I think is probably a really important component to that. Who is their constituency? Their customers are people that are paying for health insurance, whether that's employer groups, whether it's individuals that are signing up for insurance. So finding the business wins for them, they are a business, and so you have to kind of understand their business to know what might be beneficial for them.
Two related questions. One, what sorts of unique opportunities might come with working with a payer? One that comes to mind is maybe data that you might not otherwise have access to. Can you say a bit more about what role, if any, that's had in some of your work? And then two, how do you learn about the business? Maybe that goes back to listening and sort of hearing or talking to others, but how did you learn about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think to start with your second question, the one thing in Blue Cross in Michigan as an example of this is they do have many insurers will have like a foundation. And so sometimes there are funding opportunities that are provided through some of these foundations. So sometimes they are putting out opportunities for research funding. Other times, it just is building relationships with individuals and learning about the things that, for instance, I had a colleague that was working in maternal health and they had a payer that was really interested in improving maternal health. And so finding ways to build those conversations. But it doesn't come without its own challenges. I think it's a relationship that you have to understand, have very kind of frank conversations about what they're asking you to do, what you're providing for them, and really understanding that relationship fully. And I think to the question that was just put in the Q&A around like copyright provisions, I mean, those are all conversations. If you're developing some sort of app and you want to test it out, you have to be very clear. And frankly, those are conversations that are probably above my pay grade and would need to bring in university legal team to understand what those are. I am not a legal expert by any means, but really having those when you sign contracts or grants or statements of work, those things should be discussed kind of upfront, I think.
I guess maybe a related question around copyright would be just considerations regarding publication or
Yeah.
data. Have either of you run into that when working with individual funders, or is that sort of pretty usual, pretty standard across funders?
I think that is a discussion that we have frequently around what is the academic freedom by which we operate, and that has caused problems in the past. Sometimes, particularly with payers, there may be work that comes out as a result of quality improvement that may not look great for a certain payer. That being said, our experience has often been that they are happy to support it, and so long as, again, those are things that you want to make sure are predefined. And I think if you are able to build in guardrails around publication, oftentimes all they want is to be able to look at the paper and know when things are coming out. And they want some sort of acknowledgement in funding, which is, that's pretty standard. But I think you just want to make sure that those are discussions that are kind of agreed upon before that comes out, and having very strict processes around that is really important.
Yeah. And for methods grant, I think it's quite standard. I think we will publish our methods papers and associated R softwares. But it will be very important to clarify that these findings and viewpoints only represent our own viewpoint, but not the government. So this ensuring the transparency and this respect the agency boundary. So that's important. And also, during our monthly discussion with the FDA colleague, we want to know that whether our methods can be advocated by them, but they usually express a strong interest in our methods, but they won't endorse any specific approaches to sponsors or the public because they have the regulatory role. And they indicate that they will be open to considering adoptions of new methods if the company or the sponsors bring them to the table. So I think such conversations will be helpful for methods assessment and also software assessment.
A related question around authorship, is that something that needs to be negotiated? Have you run into questions or issues around that, or not really?
Not really for our grant.
Yeah, we haven't either. I think our response is always we just follow the guidelines around authorship, and that usually, journals, and it's becoming, I think, less of a problem now that journals are requiring certain levels of engagement to kind of quote unquote earn authorship. That they're off. We will acknowledge our partners, but they are often not engaged enough to kind of
qualify for authorship.
Receive authorship. Yeah.
It's moderating 101 to not ask a multi-part question because part of it never gets answered. So I'll go back to the first part of my prior multi-part question. Has working with either of these sort of non-NIH funders offered unique data resources or other types of resources, maybe around publication dissemination, that were surprising or useful or helpful?
At least in terms of working with Blue Cross, part of the relationship we have is that they're able to provide the collaboratives with resources to purchase data, and in the case of my experience is to provide us with access to their administrative data sources directly. So there is a bit of unique kind of flavor there, that they're not just giving us resources, but they're giving us their data, which comes with all sorts of rules and whatnot around how we can use them. But that's a really unique thing, that when it comes to publishing, we do have a relatively unique thing to stand on, and that we have a data source that is unique to us.
Yeah, for our side, we actually have a very comprehensive dissemination plan in the grant. So this includes holding annual expert workshop And the FDA colleagues will help disseminate this to a wide range of communities, including companies and also the internal FDA teams. And also we will develop open source software and tutorials, conducting demonstration projects, and also we can provide the training sessions to the FDA teams so that we can make our methods widely available to them, and hopefully it can be implemented widely.
Thank you. There's another question in the Q&A. This might be challenging to answer, but you've accomplished more challenging things in your lives and careers, so I'll pitch it to you. But you mentioned present cuts in grant funding. What are the predominant reasons for cuts in funds for causal inference related research? Put another way, is there anything unique about the type of work that many of us on this call are interested in that either makes it particularly susceptible to current challenges around grant funding, or maybe offers unique opportunities that might insulate it from some of the challenges that some of our colleagues and collaborators in other areas are facing?
Yeah, I think, broad cuts mean that there's just less money in the pool. And so I think there's kind of a broad level reduction that is just going to make it more challenging for anybody to get funded, regardless of the specific topic in which they're pursuing. So, I mean, that's just kind of the first order. If there's going to be 40% reduction in NIH budget, that's going to have impacts everywhere. It's not going to necessarily focus on, while there are going to be focuses in certain areas, there certainly will just be an overall more challenging environment. Now, that being said, I don't know as if there's anything inherent to causal inference methods other than, I do a lot of work in the policy space where we use a lot of causal inference methods. And so if you're evaluating or investigating policies that may be unpopular or are aligned with certain political parties that have either enacted or pulled back policies. I know, for instance, Medicaid research may be more challenging because that's a very hot button issue. So, or in specific populations. So I think it's, when it comes to challenges, it's probably more about the topic than it is about the method. But that's just my kind of understanding of kind of the broader picture at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. And because in clinical research, causal inference still plays a very important role there. And the problem are still there, so require the methodological development along to solve the problems. So although there are funding cuts, but there are also some support from the universities to continue doing the research, right? So we may get some small scale grant funding to support ourselves, and then once the funding environment becomes better, we can submit external grant funding. But you can still continue submitting the grant funding to the external federated government. I think once the environment becomes better, they will continue reviewing grants and then fund the research.
And maybe to take a slightly more positive view on things, what this may offer opportunities for is, in a world where funding is more prevalent and things are able to get funded at higher levels and higher rates, you may be able to be a little bit more, I'll say, excessive in the study designs and being able to do more clinical trials or more experiments that can be costly in a limited funding environment. Being able to take advantage of methods that can replicate experiments or randomization in ways that can leverage existing resources and be able to answer very similar questions at lower cost is going to be a big advantage. And so whether it's looking at specific therapies or medications, or in the instance of what we're doing around things like cardiac rehabilitation, proposing large trials is expensive, and those things are probably not going to be as easy to get funded. But we can use kind of much more, really cutting edge causal inference methods to answer the same question, and maybe not provide the newest trial data, but if we're able to do that at lower cost and with good, robust methods, it's going to be to your advantage to be able to take, to do that. And so that might be the positive side of the coin, is that showing that you can answer really important questions on limited budgets with good methods is something that I think the field is really well positioned for.
Thank you for adding that. I was sort of hoping that we would touch on a little bit, maybe some of the benefits of doing some of the work that we do, especially in an environment where funding is a little more challenging. Thinking back to the application process, or maybe I'll call it the engagement process with your particular funders, can you say a bit about how it was maybe different from, what we're all kind of thinking about within, or many of us were thinking about with an NIH proposal? What was different? What was surprising? Was there anything that you sort of learned as you went through it that you'd share with people who are going through it for the first time?
I think the experience that I had or have had is that it's different in that if we think of a traditional NIH grant, 12 pages, your approach is going to be at least 8 pages, or 7-8 pages of that, more than half, we'll say. It's going to be the exact opposite for working with payers or people, and if not more so in the other direction. Many of the people reviewing these grants are not methodologically savvy. They may have one statistical reviewer on a panel of 4 or 5 people. And so really emphasizing and demonstrating in some way what the impact is going to be. How is it going to, if you come up with an estimate of what this effect is going to be, what does that mean for them? What does it mean for their patients? What does it mean for people that are under their plan? And so you really have to think through the impact portion of that far more than the nuts and bolts of the methods. Really, from the method standpoint, they want to just make sure that this person knows what they're talking about. And it's more about what is the payoff. If I'm going to invest $2 million in this group, I want to know that there's going to be some sort of ROI on that, whether it's a real ROI in terms of dollars, or what the benefit to my patients or beneficiaries or whatever is going to look like.
So the ROI beyond the next R01 necessarily.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Sorry, Dr. Yang.
Yeah.
I just want to share my experience for the application process. Actually, a little bit surprising compared to the typical NIH grant. I think the FDA emphasized more on translational impact, so rather than purely methodological innovation. So they are very interested in how the proposed research could bridge the gap between the methods and also implementation in clinical and regulatory settings. So they want to see how the methods can be implemented and adopted in practice. So this is a little bit surprising, but we for the proposed method, we actually emphasize this more compared to the typical NIH grant.
Interesting. So some of these sort of approaches sound like they would also be useful in a lot of NIH proposals being reviewed by diverse study section members with diverse areas of expertise. Has it sort of informed, has going through this experience taught you how to write better grant proposals for the NIH and for other federal funders, or are they really sort of separate skill sets?
I think for me it has. I mean, I think it's been really informative to, while people on NIH study sections are well educated and experienced researchers and clinicians, they're not experts in everything. And so you have to, being very straightforward and simple with your language, telling things in a very straightforward and clear manner is beneficial regardless. And so that's just telling a good story and being able to put it on paper. And really in a time now, especially when NIH funding is moving towards a grading criteria that is heavily focused on impact and importance of your research, it may actually be more important now to emphasize what the impact of your research is going to look like, and doing that in a way that is accessible to everybody and well read by everybody, I think is really important. And it's really helped me to think less academically about it and think more in putting things in very good, very easy layman's terms, without oversimplifying is a real art that I'm still trying to perfect, but I think is a really important thing to work on.
Yeah, so usually the review panels are very diverse, and this diversity means reviewers bring different perspectives, right? Some focus on methodological rigor, and others like focus on like translational impact, feasibility, and other aspects, right? And one insight is that usually proposal with clear connections to the real world applications. So if you have important real world applications in the proposal, these applications tend to stand out, right? So it will be helpful to anticipate diverse review backgrounds so that we can like tailor our stories to different reviewers.
Thank you. A related question in the Q&A about this process of developing strong proposals. Do you have any suggestions about specific training programs to become better grant writers as students or postdocs, or maybe even more broadly, how did you learn how to write a strong competitive proposal?
I think I learned from rejections.
Yeah, it is absolutely it's a process. You write a grant and then you figure out how to write it better. I find that reading other, if you have colleagues that have had successful grants, getting examples of those and reading them, as many as you can get your hands on, is really helpful, because you can kind of see how different people think through writing a grant. And not everyone's style is going to be the same as your style. And so coming up with your own way of doing that, and really that just is just getting into it and trying.
Yeah, I actually spent a lot of time each year writing grants, and I had many rejections over the years, and there are different reviewer concerns. So, for example, one time reviewer felt that our methods has promising direction, but it appeared too complicated to be implemented in practice. So that's why I learned that like we need to make the methods more accessible to the readers, and without very detailed like technical details, this will like make the reviewers scared. And in other cases, also the methodology was viewed promising, but the application lacks of sufficient preliminary data, so that if I were to write the grant again, I will add more like preliminary data to like support the feasibility. So all these components are learned from the rejections. So I agree, this is a process. We have a learning curve.
There's a good question in the Q&A. I'll let our reviewers sort of contemplate it for a moment while I ask a follow-up question related to proposal development. Can you say a bit about what's the duration of these proposals? Are they 5-year projects or more 1 or 2-year projects? And how do you conceptualize the scope of work that you can do in a 1 or 2-year proposal as opposed to a longer proposal? How does that influence kind of what you take on and consider?
Yeah, I think and this may be an oversimplification of the process. I think if you have 3 aims for, roughly 3 aims for and Andy, this from being at the U of M way of doing things, that
I think
2 is not enough and 4 is too many. But I often think of things as an individual aim or research question as something that could happen over a 2-year period roughly. And so I try to be realistic with it, and maybe there's nuances to that. But I think it's really important to consider, like, if you overload what you're going to do, how well you're going to be able to deliver on it. And so, and how much time do you have dedicated? Do you have any staff that can help support it? All those things are going to go into that question of whether or not you're going to be able to execute a 2-year grant or a 5-year grant.
Yeah, and for the grant, usually you need to like specify the timeline for the research questions. So you can really like start thinking about like when you're gonna start aim 1 and how long it lasts, like so that you can finish the project, and when the aim 2 can be started. So if you think through all these components, you will see like how the entire research process looks like, how long it takes.
Great, thank you. One of the questions in the Q&A is, can you elaborate on whether current requirements emphasize translational impact at the individual or population level? I'll do a little editorializing and maybe say, can you say a bit about the importance of emphasizing maybe real-world impact or translation either as a part of the individual proposal, or if not, sort of specifically talking about it as a direct next step or consequence of the methodologic work that you're doing?
I mean, I think that question will partly be answered by wherever you're submitting your grant, because that I think is where they want to see the impact. And obviously NIH has very specific definitions around impact, what they like to see. I mean, at the end of the day, you want to be able to have some sort of, depending on what the funding mechanism looks like, it's that question is going to be kind of answered for you to a certain extent. But I think the days of having like an NIH style grant or others that are simply knowledge gained without some sort of impact in return are probably gone to a certain extent, or they're going to be much harder to get.
Yeah, I think to achieve broad impact is the long-term value of the grant, because you don't want to just develop methods. You also want the method to be utilized, adopted in practice, right? So to have some broader impact plans in the proposal will be very helpful. So for example, in our grant, we actually have a large portion, actually 1A, devoted for the dissemination plans, including annual expert workshops, like tutorial softwares. All these actually are very important. That goes along with the methodological development.
Great, thank you. And two other questions in the Q&A that I think are related. One is, how difficult is it for young scholars to enter the grant system at present? And then maybe sort of the other side of that question is, how do new assistant professors or early career faculty members engage successfully with the grant sort of proposal process and really make the transition from student reliant on support from a mentor or others to early faculty member who's really managing a research group and has stable funding? There's a lot there. You have
Yeah,
5 minutes.
It's a great question. I think the way I'll answer it is through baby steps. Pursuing, and this has been my experience, pursuing small seed funding at your institution, finding small grants that you can apply for that you can kind of put together little pots of money here and there to support your work. And then, success through those small grants is going to beget more success in early investigator awards are obviously a very common mechanism, which I think are still being relatively prioritized and I think a little bit more so than kind of standard R01s. Like there's career development awards are still getting funded as while others are not. So I think there seems to be a continued emphasis on early investigators, and so those are great bridges for large scale R01 funding or large scale kind of grant funding at writ large. So I think going from nothing to a full R01 style grant is going to be hard to do, but they're building a portfolio of success will beget more success.
Yeah, I think getting a small seed funding grant will be very helpful because it prepares you for some preliminary results so that you can show your expertise. And then you also need to exchange ideas frequently with the program officers or the peers, right? Understand the involving priorities, and so that you can target or tailor your research directions to more important priorities, and also learn about the emerging funding opportunities. So once all these come together, you are ready to go, right? So you are more likely to get the funding. So proactive communication and also periodically checking with the program officers, and also understand the priorities are very important.
Great, thank you. That brings us pretty close to the end of the hour. I appreciate both of you and all of your insight. I made it through about a quarter of my questions and wrote down about 4 pages of notes from everything that you shared with us. So thank you so much again, and thank you to our panelists for joining us, and then for all the participants as well for signing on. Thank you very much. Dr. Wong, you have your hand up. Do you want to share some parting words, or?
No, I just want to express my thankfulness to the speakers. I want to give a applause, but I pressed the wrong button.
This is even more personal and well received. So thank you. I'm glad you pressed the wrong button. Thank you, everyone, very much. We'll go ahead and end the webinar here. And please be sure to sign up for the OCIS mailing list to be apprised of upcoming fantastic seminars. And we'll look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.